Well, welcome everyone. My name is Jim Stewart. I'm here with my colleague and friend, Lalique Masarian, and we're going to talk to you today about Agile for executives. It isn't that there's a different version of Agile for executives, it's just that we want executives to understand where this fits into their organization. So what we're going to do is Lalique is going to do the presentation. I'm going to introduce her in a second, and I'm going to watch the chat. So you want to open up your chat. You'll see the link for it on the bottom. And as questions are chatted to us, if they seem important at that moment for clarification, I'll answer them then. Otherwise, we'll have a question and answer at the end. And I may jump in with some comments as Lalique is talking. So let me introduce her. Lalique and I have formed an organization called the Agile Collaborative. It's all Agile work, transformations, training, coaching, Scrum Master, etc. I've known Lalique for a long time. In fact, I first met her when she was the president of the Mass Bay chapter of the Project Management Institute, and I volunteered there. And we've kept in touch for a long time. And she's currently working on an Agile transformation, meaning taking an organization that was doing traditional waterfall and converting them over to Agile. She's led a lot of complex technology business projects. I won't read you the entire note for note, but she's also currently an adjunct professor at Boston College. So, and we've done a couple of things together. I have been a project manager for many years, too many. I've been independent since 2003. My sweet spots have been IT, the financial world, and pharmaceutical. And I've established several PMOs. I'm currently working on a pharmaceutical project for EU medical device remediation. I have a number of certifications, and I am also a co-author of a book. And my partner in that book happens to be listening on this call. We wrote a book together. Ms. Rich Mulsman. It's called How to Facilitate Productive Project Planning Meetings. So we have all the bases covered here. And I think that's the introduction, and I turn it back over to you, Lily.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to start with the learning outcomes from this presentation, which are for you to understand the Agile methods and how they can help an enterprise, to also understand how Agile helps provide business value faster for you, understand as executives what you can do as next steps to turbocharge your project delivery and business value optimization, understand how your Agile teams can work remotely, and also understand key findings from research about the state of Agile and its trajectory into all kinds of different verticals outside the software, the traditional software vertical. The specific topics we'll cover is the executive briefing, starting with what is Agile and what you as executives need to know well about Agile, what your role is as an executive in Agile, and present to you with some fact-based impacts to organizations and your customer base. To help you understand whether you should go Agile, we'd look at some criteria you may want to consider. We'll look at a couple of actual case studies, one of them being my client at the moment. We'll cover Agile Mythbusters, incorporating some of how to work remotely, especially in this environment. We'll go through some Agile metrics you may want to consider as part of your transformation. We'll touch on scaled Agile, and then we'll present you with key takeaways and a 20-second elevator speech. Let's start with what is Agile. Agile simply is a framework for organizing and managing work. And Agile methods are many, including Scrum, which is the most popular technique, followed by Kanban, extreme programming, lean, feature-driven development, and there are also other less leveraged methods. One thing I'd like to share with you I read recently was to help you understand the distinctions between Agile, Kanban, Scrum, and some of these other things. Think about Agile as a car brand like Toyota, and think about the methods under the Agile umbrella as different car types. So if Agile was Toyota, Scrum could be Corolla, Toyota Corolla. Kanban could be a Toyota Camry, and so forth. So they're different brands, in our case, methods under the Agile umbrella.
And I just want to add one thing, if I may, Lalique, to that one. Kanban is probably the next most popular one, and that's more for interrupt-driven work. And there's really two main things around it. One is to visualize your work, and the second one is to limit work in process or work in progress. So that's the other one we hear about some.
Right. Thank you. We'll see an example of that later in one of the slides there. So in the Agile world, we always talk about the Agile Manifesto, and we talk about the 12 principles of Agile. So the Agile Manifesto is basically saying we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software instead of comprehensive documentation or over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. There is value on the items on the right. There's value in processes and tools. There's value in documentation and contract negotiation and so forth. But in Agile, we value the items on the left more. So greater bias on putting forth working software instead of lots of documentation, or relying on individuals and interactions for communication instead of using or relying solely on processes and tools. So if you think about Agile, remember the old ways of creating requirements documentations and handing them over to developers for them to interpret then what is being asked. So in Agile, this turns it around and relies on collaboration between the people who are asking for the work and the people who are actually building the solution so that they can collaborate in real time and talk more instead of relying on paper and interpretation. There's a link in the bottom of the slide about the 12 principles of Agile, and I really encourage you to visit that site and read them because they're really the underpinnings of the Agile Manifesto, and hopefully between the manifesto and the principles, it will help you develop a clearer understanding of what is Agile. Here's an example of an Agile usage somewhere you may not expect, the Netherlands Police Department Task Force. Now this is the mobile unit of the Netherlands Police Department. And if you think about police departments traditionally, officers have cases and they have them in manila folders in probably metal cabinets at their desk without a lot of transparency on who's working on what case and where things stand. So this board is a Kanban board, the one you're looking at, to do, doing, done. And Kanban is a Japanese word which means a visual signal or sign board. So here it clearly shows what is to do, what is doing or in process, and what has been done. So this Kanban board helps the police department and many other entities create that transparency. So anybody going by, instead of having to ask where things stand or who's working on what, they're able to refer to a simple board like this, and you can put any columns that you would like to be able to understand where things stand. And other benefactors or beneficiaries of this type of process would include law firms. So to know who's working on what, lawsuit or case, HR organizations, for example, who may want to have a board like this for their recruiting department, for example, to see where each recruit is for what role and where they are in the process. So again, instead of relying on individual recruiters and their files and folders, a Kanban board makes that very transparent and easily relatable and referable. In other industries like marketing, software companies, financial companies, other companies are leveraging Kanban boards. Basically, the takeaway from this slide is that anywhere where you need prioritization, transparency, inspection, and adaptation, these are the keys for people in that group to stay relevant and on top of what is going on in their group, and also to leverage any kind of emergent opportunity. So if there's a higher priority that comes up, it's very easy for people to see what needs to shift to accommodate an emergent opportunity or a higher prioritization item. So why Agile? We've been doing project management for quite a long time, and we had, what is known as the waterfall or plan-driven project management methodology, and it worked well for a long time and still works well enough in projects where there's high level of predictability, meaning the requirements are known and not expected to change. The projects are repeatable, so you do them over and over again, and where requirements are really well understood and well documented. But we've learned over time that we need to adapt to change. And this is where Agile is particularly helpful in projects where requirements are not 100% well understood, and you want to keep an open mind to adopt and adapt to emergent opportunities or leverage a change as a competitive advantage. So over time, these adaptive, change-driven agile methodologies have really sprung up to really enable that frequent change that is so typified in business, focus relentlessly on prioritized business value, and also recognition of and dealing with uncertainty. So in the traditional waterfall world, you had requirements. Business analysts wrote reams of paper and requirements. They went through the requirements, they got requirements signed off, and then they went into the design phase and then the development phase. But lo and behold, you may find that you didn't really understand all those requirements as much as you thought you did. So you may have a sense of a false comfort there, but in reality, as you go to develop and so forth, you may find that you may have misunderstood or misrepresented certain things in requirement. So you need to be open to change. And that's typically harder to do when you're using waterfall than when you're using agile. More to come on that, but that's just a baseline there. So in a traditional waterfall project, you go through this waterfall analysis, design, development, etc., and then you have this big launch at the end, and you hope that what your analyst captured and documented in the analysis phase really aligns with what your end users and key stakeholders and your customers wanted. So the risk here is that you may have the wrong product when you get to the end. The market may shift, business priorities may change, your business strategy may change, and also the technical integration way at the end of the project may not work. So when you do the sum of all the pieces that you've done in development, your application may not work. So that's the risk. And the impact, of course, would be a lot of time and money and resources wasted. It would take too long for you to reach production. Quality may be suboptimal, and your customer satisfaction may be low because you didn't really have a process in here to build in customer feedback as you were developing the product.
And there's a question here, Lalique, which was, we have the concept really comes from traditional project management, progressive elaboration as we elaborate and learn more and more as we go along, more towards planning. Do you see a overlap there or a linkage or a similarity in that concept?
So what I would say to that is, Agile is built for change, as I always say. So, when you're planning your Agile project and you're using a method like Scrum, you're maybe planning, work for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Nothing longer than that would be considered Agile. So if there is a change, all you have to do is wait for that sprint to finish to incorporate the change that you want into the next sprint. So change isn't a bad word in Agile. Change is actually welcome. Whereas with a waterfall project, I understand the concept of progressive elaboration where, we plan for 3 months out, and then, in the second month, we plan for 3 months out and so forth. But there is a heavier process, I would say, with change control boards and change control processes. So while you're refining and progressively elaborating, there's still this reliance on requirements and a change control process that doesn't free you from adopting change as easily as you would in Agile. So that's the side of that.
And I would take that a step further and say the type of progressive elaboration you were just referring to is called rolling wave planning. And we definitely, even if we don't use that expression in Agile, the concept is there.
Exactly.
Okay.
So turning that around, so what happens with Agile? Well, we have this concept of failing faster so you can pivot or shift direction. So in Agile, as I said, you have iterations or sprints, to use a Scrum word, and they're time boxed. They're 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks long. And at the end, you want to get to potentially shippable product increment. So what that helps you do is after you have a few sprints, maybe 2 sprints, maybe 3 sprints, up to the company, you launch something into production. And that's a time when the rubber really hits the road and you see if what you delivered aligns with what the expectations were from the most important people, your customers. And collecting that feedback informs you on what you may want to do next on the product. So you have a chance to inspect and adapt based on an actual release, based on actual frequent feedback, and build that into your next launch, and you just repeat that. So what you're doing with Agile is you're having smaller, more frequent releases, while you're also having that relentless focus on that top 20% of items that add the business value. So while this is going on, the people working on the project, specifically one of the roles on a Scrum team, which we'll talk about, is speaking with customers and stakeholders to understand their biases, their needs, their feedback, and feeding that to the development team so the solution that they're building is always inclusive of just-in-time, fresh input and feedback and comments from the customer base to ultimately make the finished product closer to what the customers want because they've had input into the process and into the requirements. A quick slide here from the Chaos Manifesto from the Standish Group, and they review thousands and thousands of projects, and they look at all kinds of different project delivery methods and also the success factor and number of features that were used. So this one particular slide talks about features that they found based on their research, what percentages of features were used often, gray area, not sure, and 50% hardly ever or never used. So if you're an Agile executive or an executive in any company, you don't want to be the executive who puts out a lot of money to build an application where in retrospect, you learn that only 20 out of the, say, 100 features that were built in this application are being used often. Because arguably the other 80% would be wasteful of time and money and an opportunity cost to build other applications or to fund other projects. So this is why Agile is so important, because you want this number, 20% in this case, to be as high as you can make it. And the way to approach that would be to make sure that you're actually not assuming what people want, but you're actually asking people what they want and what's important, and working on things that add that business value with that customer input, instead of making assumptions, delivering something at the very end and hoping it aligns with what people want. And also another important concept that I'd like to underscore in Agile is that it's outputs that matter. It's outputs that don't matter. It's the outcomes that matter. Meaning that you want to deliver the outcomes that your customers expect. So just because you said you would build 100 features and you did build 100 features, that may not be the features that customers wanted. So customers care about outcomes, not the outputs. If you did 100 things you said you were going to do, that in and of itself does not mean success. It's the outcomes that matter. And the way you would understand that is by saying if people are using your application, if the features are being used often versus being here on the right side of the slide with the 30% gray area and 50% never used and so forth. Gulf of evaluation, I'm sure you've all seen this slide. The reason we put this here is to refer back to one of the Agile Manifesto items, which is, collaboration and communication over processes and tools, right? So here we have a customer explaining a swing set a specific way, the project leader understanding it a different way, analyst documenting it, programmer writing it, and so forth. So when you get to the end, what the customer really wanted was just, a tire hanging from a tree limb. And, the customer was built as if it was like a really cool roller coaster. It was installed a certain way by the operations team and so forth. So when you have a process as an Agile, where you're constantly inspecting and adapting, and you're showing work in progress, saying, this is how I understood it. Is this right? So if you were to share this swing as it was being developed, instead of revealing it at the end, then you have a better chance of making sure that what you are building as you're building it with feedback aligns with what people want, instead of a big reveal at the end where you may completely miss the mark. As in my experience, I have seen many times, and I'm sure others on this call, this may resonate with a lot of people on this webinar, because they've also had instances, I am sure, of building solutions that didn't align with what customers ultimately wanted, but it was just a gap in understanding and assessing and interpretation because there wasn't that feedback incorporated along the way. A quick picture, and more to come on this in Scrum, but this is basically the framework of Scrum. You have input from stakeholders that go into a product backlog, which has all the things that all the features and all the work that may or may not be delivered on this product. You have the Scrum team with the 3 champions, Scrum Master, Product Owner, Development Team. You have a Scrum event called Sprint Planning, which you do on the first day of a sprint. You are selecting items from the product backlog into the sprint backlog. What are you going to work on now? Not everything at the same time, but whatever you select in your sprint backlog. You have your daily Scrum for your developers, which is a great opportunity for collaborating, communicating, talking about blocks. You have the sprint execution as the solution is being built. Then you have the sprint retrospective, another key event in Scrum for inspect and adapt, where you are talking about the process that you followed in Scrum. And you also have the sprint review, where you're actually demonstrating the product and you are talking about what comes next. In terms of the order of events, you start the sprint with sprint planning, then you have the daily Scrum every day during sprint execution. You have the sprint review, and then you have the sprint retrospective. So the review is about the product, the retrospective is about the Scrum process. And at the end of the sprint, your goal always is potentially shippable product increment. So you want to do everything you need to do in the sprint to get a feature to be potentially shippable. And that means developing, testing, integration, whatever you need to do to get it potentially shippable. And how exciting is that for executives to be able to say that they have now a process where before it may take 6 months to do a deployment to production, but now with this revised Agile approach, they may be able to do it much more frequently, up to maybe every 2 weeks. So that's a huge customer satisfaction improvement. And that's a great, also, in my opinion, that's also a great strategic advantage for any company who's able to overcome any challenges with the delivery approach and be able to deliver via a process that allows them to deliver much more frequently and increase customer satisfaction.
And I just want to say one thing here that's a very high level. You would learn that, well, since this is Agile for executives, we're keeping this at a very high level, but that's the type of thing you would learn or you would send your people to for a 2-day, say, Scrum Master course, which, by the way, the League and I do that. We're putting together a course that will go through Agile from soup to nuts, but that's a very high level of what Scrum looks like.
Right. Thank you, Jim. All right, so continuing with the high-level overview, I covered most of these in the prior slide, but I just want to call out the product owner role, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But the product owner is a key player on the team, as are the other roles, right? The Scrum Master and the development team. So the product owner is someone who is the single voice for that product, who is the person who owns that product and is respected by the organization to be able to make decisions about that product without having to consult a committee. So that independence, that respect, that single voice of the customer is very critical in order for Agile to work. It's one of the important aspects that enables and empowers Agile to work. And the product owner maintains the product backlog that is basically the inventory or the warehouse where all the features that may or may not be done on this product is kept. Sprint planning, as we said, is, you take a small chunk of the backlog and you plan to work on it now. So it allows that focus on just the work in that sprint and not boiling the ocean and not everything else in the product backlog. The team has a time box. It's called a sprint in Scrum. Generically in Agile, it may be called an iteration, but it's a time box to complete the work. And the team meets via daily stand-up every day to track its progress and communicate and collaborate and so forth and talk about blocks and getting unblocked. And the Scrum Master, who is the servant leader of the team, helps the team adhere to the Scrum principles. And if the product owner is having a problem prioritizing or assessing business value, if the developers are having a hard time or they're blocked, the Scrum Master helps unblock them and keep the process moving forward. One note here, a quote from Jeff Sutherland, who is one of the parents of Scrum, the other being Ken Schwaber, is that when Scrum was created, they specifically created it with specific roles, and there is no such role as a project manager in Scrum, because fundamentally a Scrum team was designed to be self-organized and decision made by the Scrum team and not handed down from a project manager. So a big change here, shift culturally, is the change from project manager, command and control, to a Scrum team where the team is self-organized and makes decisions and is accountable to those decisions.
Lalik, I have a very good question here. I think is probably should answer here because it's timely in terms
Sure.
of where we are and what's going on. So for those listening to this, we're recording this during the COVID-19 situation. And the question is, the questioner is asking if Scrum feels like is designed to be a co-located situation, how well can we work remotely, or can we? What's the answer there?
Yeah, so ideally you'd want your teams to be co-located. So if you have a question, you don't have to same time them or FaceTime them, or you don't have to, collaborate that way. You can just pop your head and say, hey, Bob, what is, 2 + 2? In reality, though, we find that a lot of development teams are, offshore. A lot of the, Scrum team has members that are dispersed, particularly in this environment. So a lot of people in my experience who are using an Agile method were already working remotely, but the daily stand-up is the critical glue that helps, keep the teams communicating and collaborating. I would say, to the extent possible, it's very critical for the development teams to be co-located to the extent possible. And in my experience, since we've outsourced development for the most part, that has been accomplished. It's also very important for the product owner to be accessible very easily to the developers in case they have a question. So they can ask the question in real time and not have to send an email, wait for the email response, interpret what was documented. So there are techniques, if you're not co-located, where you can make things easier. Meaning have a daily stand up with the developers, as you should, right? That's part of the requirement. But then you may want to have, a quick 15-minute touch base with the product owner if you're remote, and invite the Scrum Master to just, give a quick demo of whatever was built that day, or to ask any questions that are not urgent, but you need to know for the next day. So there are different techniques that you can leverage if you're not co-located. And I have a feeling with where we are in the new world order that I anticipate is coming with, remote working and so forth, that's going to become even more critical for people to find ways that work for them, that bridge the gap of people not being physically co-located, but yet still being able to accomplish the upside of co-location, which is communication in real time. So I challenge people to, be creative in how they can accomplish that without being co-located. Okay, so continuing with the Scrum method of Agile, we've talked about the sprint review, which is a demo, not a PowerPoint, of working product, and also an invitation to discuss what needs to be done next in the next sprint on this product. The sprint ends with the review and the retrospective being the last thing you do before the next sprint starts. There's no break in between the last sprint and the next sprint. You just go from sprint to sprint without any breaks in between. At the end of the sprint, as we said, the work should be potentially shippable, meaning it should be ready to hand to a customer. It doesn't mean you have to put something in the hands of a customer at the end of every sprint, but it should be potentially shippable, and there's the big word. The retrospective, lessons learned, you talk about, what went well, what didn't go well, what do we want to do better? And a good practice to do is to take at least one high priority process improvement and work on it and incorporate it into the next sprint. And as the next sprint begins, again, you start with sprint planning, and then you choose another set of features or backlog items that you'd want to work on. So you just repeat the cycle over and over again. 4 key Scrum events: the sprint planning, the daily stand-up, the sprint review, and the retrospective. I think we've talked about all of these things, and unless there are questions, I'll just move on in the interest of time. Roles on the Scrum team, very, very important. You notice, as we said a couple of slides back, there's no role as project manager. You have the product owner, the development team, and the Scrum master. So product owner, I think we've talked about being the owner of the product vision and the backlog, voice of the customer and the business value maximizer. They're the person an executive would go to and say, why did you do this feature and not that feature? And the product owner needs to clearly be able to articulate the business value of one item versus another item, one feature versus another feature. And they also want to optimize the development team by having them work on the highest priority items, and also not allowing someone to walk into the developer's room and asking them for things that are not in that sprint, for example. So the product owner also, as well as the Scrum Master, want to insulate the team somewhat by not allowing outside interferences to interrupt the work or add more work within a sprint to the developers while a sprint is in flight. The development team, the people who actually make it happen, they deliver the solution, they're self-organized, they make their decisions. There's no team lead, there's no committee, there's no chief architect, there are no roles, they're all developers. They all put their heads together and they have their skills. And when you form a Scrum team, you want to have a development team that has all the skills that you need, your sort of bag of tricks, your toolkit. And the ideal team size is 3 to 9, because less than 3 developers, you may not have the right skill sets or enough of the right skill sets. More than 9 makes communication and collaboration maybe a challenge. The biggest job is to deliver shippable, done product increment every sprint. And they own the sprint backlog. Important distinction. The product backlog, the product level, is owned by the product owner. At the sprint level, it's owned by the development team. Once they pull something into the sprint backlog and they commit to it, it's theirs to do and it's theirs to finish in that sprint. So important distinction there. And the Scrum Master, while they don't have the same command and control concept as we would in a traditional waterfall project, they're a coach, they're an impediment remover. They facilitate meetings as needed. They help promote and support Scrum theory and practices and so forth. And definitely not a project manager. I just want to be really clear on that point. Speaking of project managers, if you're an executive, you have an organization and you have a lot of, well-trained, certified project managers, does that mean they're all, now irrelevant if you go to Agile? The answer is absolutely not. Because while there is no project manager role in Agile, it's very easy for a project manager to become a Scrum Master. I am one of those individuals who's worked in traditional waterfall project delivery as a project manager for a long time before I became a certified Scrum Master and started acting as a Scrum Master. And it was difficult initially to sort of switch and unlearn a lot of things I had learned to be an effective project manager. But with retraining and retooling and learning my role as a Scrum Master, as a coach, as a facilitator, and not being tempted to say, you know what you should do? You should do this. So instead of saying you should do this, which I would have done as a project manager, I needed to say, what do you think we should do? Have you thought about this? What about that? Instead of being having that mindset of a project manager, wanting to fix problems and telling people what they should do. So that's probably one of the biggest things you have to unlearn, get unstuck in, and then understand the role of a Scrum Master. I've also worked with project managers, former project managers who became program level project managers. So a company might have several projects going on, or they may have a program and lots of projects underneath it. And a project manager can play the role of a program level manager to do things across projects in terms of communication or risk management. Doesn't take away the ownership from each of the Scrum teams, but for executives and PMOs, they need that horizontal cross-cutting view across all the projects. Former project manager as a program level manager may do status reporting. There are other things that a former project manager can do in an Agile world. It doesn't make them irrelevant. It's just if they want to play the role of a Scrum Master, they need to think differently and and act differently. But there are also other roles that they can play in an Agile world. It doesn't make them irrelevant. Pre-sprint planning. Before you start sprinting, in Waterfall, this may have been called envisioning or pre-planning, or any other words that companies may use. But this is where you're actually getting ready. You are overseeing the grooming of the product backlog. So the product owner is prioritizing things. The development team is helping size the product backlog. Then, as a participant during the sprint planning, whether you're the Scrum Master or you're the development team or you're the product owner, you are participating in sprint planning to then say, okay, from this big backlog of 100 things, which ones are we going to do in the sprint planning? So going through the sprint backlog, the product owner is answering questions so that the backlog can be elaborated. They may be talking to developers about complexity and risk of features so that they can be sized appropriately. The Scrum Master may attend the daily Scrum, or the product owner may attend the daily Scrum, but fundamentally the daily Scrum is for developers to communicate and collaborate. If there are things that can be shown, maybe they can be demonstrated for bits and pieces of parts of whatever was built. The Scrum Master is also participating in the sprint review and the sprint retrospective as a participant and facilitating any kind of meeting as needed. And then you have stakeholders, and you may wonder, okay, Lali, you mentioned user feedback, you mentioned frequent inspection, adaptation. Where do those key stakeholders come in? Well, the answer is they come in during the sprint review, where you stakeholders attend and are shown what is built. And based on that, they provide feedback that then helps prioritize things in the product backlog and then helps inform what happens in the next sprint planning. An actual case study, this is my client right now, large healthcare company, waterfall delivery approach, $3 million development and maintenance budget a year, offshore development team, but also onshore teams, but dispersed throughout the United States, 45 total people on the various teams on the project. And the challenges were needing better prioritization of business value, better governance, to align all these multiple groups on their own individual priorities, more upfront user engagement before launches, so there's no surprises when something goes to production, more frequent delivery to increase customer satisfaction. So if a customer had a problem, they didn't want to wait 6 months for the next release to get their bug fixed, and needed better quality delivery in a more stable application. So I helped the company after I went in. About 3.5 months later, we already had our Scrum teams and we started scrumming. And what we gained after a few initial bumps in the first couple of sprints, because it's different and people need time to adapt and adjust. Where we landed was smaller, more frequent releases. We increased releases from 5 releases per year to 20 releases a year. We also had a mindset shift. Each team, with the increased end user feedback, became more customer centric. So instead of saying, I think this is what the customers want, it was like, I need to ask them, I need to engage them upfront to make sure I understand what they want so I can build the right solutions. It was very interesting. One of those things that you can't really measure until after the fact when you do customer satisfaction surveys, and you say, hey, this process works because we are delivering what our end users want, because we're engaging them earlier and more frequently. We ended up creating 7 self-organized teams. And it's amazing when you give people accountability for their work and you tell them, you make the decisions, you own those decisions, but you make them. It's very empowering, sometimes scary for people, but you can see what amazing work people can do when they feel like they're accountable and they make that commitment. There was obviously a huge increase in user satisfaction. Very happy to see things more frequently delivered, their problems more frequently solved, and having a voice in that process. and huge quality improvements because we were focusing on small bits of work at a time, and we were focused on testing and just shining light on that small body of work every 2 weeks that we're doing, and not really worrying about other things that are in the backlog, really helped shift the bias towards higher quality, and also led to, obviously increased customer satisfaction and a huge drop in help desk tickets for work, because they just didn't find the same bugginess that they had with the former application.
I think I just want to let you know we're probably about 35 minutes in, so just let you know the time we're out now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll speed it up. Okay, so case study. Here's one from Harvard Business Review. I won't read all the bullets, but this was a case where this entity needed rapid innovation, and it had become a strategic imperative, as it is for most companies, not just this one. In the case of HR, transformation around hiring, developing, managing people. We talked a little bit about the Kanban board on the prior slide about how we can help a recruiting organization get better transparency into who's in the recruitment flow and where things stand. And the one thing I'll call out on this case study, and this is a much joked about, thing in Agile, but we always talk about the musketeer attitude. Sometimes it's called swarming, meaning like everybody rolls up their sleeves and jumps in when somebody needs help. But the musketeer attitude is that the whole team fails or the whole team succeeds. The all for one and one for all. Because in Waterfall, if you think about it, you had the business analysts on their own, you had the designers, you had the developers, and each set of resources felt like, okay, well, thank God that was not a development problem. That was a business analyst problem because the requirement was wrong. In Agile, we want to change that. We want to say we're a whole team, we're one team, there's no vendors, we're all one team, even if you have vendors. So the whole team fails or the whole team succeeds. In the case of HR, just add a sidebar that, a lot of companies that, I've been working with, HR departments, they are shifting the mindset of performance reviews. So instead of individuals, it's more Scrum team, performance review at the team level. So definitely sort of turning the dial, heading into that direction. In the case of this particular case study, after Agile, the Kanban board, making the recruiting process more transparent, also helping, very importantly, analyze any key skill gaps and, filling the gap there. It's helpful to use a Kanban board in HR to understand what skills you need, what skills are not there, and how you bridge that gap. Also helps with succession planning or building a bench, as we say, encouraging collaboration, innovation, high level of flexibility, and reducing that complexity and that unpredictability. So with greater transparency comes greater, unraveling of unpredictability and accomplishing greater accountability and greater predictability, which really makes people less anxious. If you stop and think about that for a second, you will realize that the more things you know and the more transparent it is, the less anxious it makes you. So that's also another upside of going Agile. A few Agile mythbusters, I hear these all the time. Agile is for software companies only. No, because people have found creative ways to use the Agile methods and techniques to bring it to their world, whether it's adopting a few of the techniques or the whole set of techniques. There are things that you can borrow from Agile, regardless of the industry, to make Agile principles work for you. Agile means I can change my mind anytime. You can, to an extent, meaning that if you have a great idea and you want to change something, you can always add a work item in the product backlog and include it in the next sprint. What you can't do is change things in the middle of a sprint once the sprint is committed to and work is in process. So, Agile welcomes change. Agile is built for change, but there are places where you can, adopt that change, and it's not anywhere and any time, but there's a process for that. Agile means no planning or documentation. Also not true, right? While there isn't as much planning or documentation, you want to do planning just in time. Again, you don't want to plan things for 8 months from now. You don't want to write requirements for something that's going to be delivered 8 months from now because the world changes, but you want to do it just in time. And you want to have sufficiently detailed information, but you don't want to have pounds of paper because there's no value in that because things change. Agile works for small projects, but does not scale to large projects. Also not true. There's a technique we'll talk about shortly called Scaled Agile, and there's different techniques underneath that umbrella that allow you to spin up multiple teams and scale up Agile within the enterprise. So eventually, over time, your entire enterprise can become Agile, all the parts of your enterprise. Agile is a panacea for all our project problems. No, if you're having delivery problems, there are root causes that you need to understand. Agile is not the magic bullet. It's not a panacea. So you need to solve those root problems. You need to understand what they are first. And management loses control when we go Agile. Also not true. For functional people managers, you still have people on that Scrum teams or Agile teams that need to have performance reviews done. They need people coaching. They, need things at the organizational, at the corporate level that management helps as well. Executive management in terms of the corporate strategy, the overall, executive initiatives, those things are still needed. And that's the role that executives would play. So there is a continuing role for them. That role does not go away. And Agile, by the way, is not a fad, as a lot of people tend to say. Agile is definitely not a fad. If you, we'll see shortly some surveys and some recent analysis that was done that really underscore that. So I won't read all the bullets here on the right-hand side of the quote, but the only thing, I guess, as an executive, if anybody need to ask yourself, is there anything that you can think of that does not have some kind of a software component associated with it? So while you may think, hey, I'm a, blah, blah, blah company, and, Agile is for software, so it may not apply to me. I challenge you to think about what we've covered so far and figure out ways from adopting Agile to your world, because I know there probably can't think of anything where some kind of software component isn't relevant. As J.J. Sutherland, who's the son of Jeff Sutherland, said, my washing machine wants the Wi-Fi password. So there you have it. Jimmy asked earlier about working remotely, and just some additional points on that.
Let me just jump in if I can on this, because you did cover pretty well the league, but I think the thing, and I didn't say anything at that point, was to also mention that not only are we more used to working remotely, but there's a plethora of really good tools. We all know Zoom, all those ones that remotely connect, but we have Jira for doing, and Confluence for doing our sprints, Microsoft Mural for whiteboards, all that. A lot of good tools now.
Yep. The last bullet I'll call out is whatever you do, whichever tool you choose, and companies have access to different tools, as Jim said. The tool is less important. The more important thing is that people using whatever tool you choose are comfortable using it, and they do use it for communication. And if you have tools that allow you to communicate in real time, or if you can tag people in your tool so that you don't have to generate an email and send an email, but make sure that you leverage the tools and maximize the benefit that they're designed to deliver, and not fall back on your old methods of emails, on long emails and so forth. So that's something that every person on a team needs to check for themselves and make sure that they're using the tool and that they understand how to use the tool. And if they have a problem, to raise their hand and ask for help so that they're getting the benefit that is intended there. And lastly, for anybody, especially for people who are not co-located, they may miss a meeting. You may want to record the meeting for others to listen to, especially, critical, important meetings where decisions may be made. And it's important for others to, understand that and listen to that later. So as an executive, we've covered a lot of things, right? Well, you don't need to be an expert in the Agile methods or Scrum or be a Scrum Master. There are some things as an executive we suggest you need to know well, starting with your reasons for transformation, right? Just because everybody else seems to be doing it is not a good enough reason, but you really need to know what is the set of business problems, excuse me, that you are trying to solve. So understand your reasons. Also understand the business value that you want to drive higher. what is it that you want to accomplish? Is it that you want to deliver more frequently because your uh, competitors are eating your lunch? Your competitors are way ahead and you're trying to catch up. What is it that you think your customers want? Do you want to do a survey of your customers to inform you on, their feedback on your product before you start your next sprint? So what's the business value that you want to drive higher? What your customers are missing? Again, you may want to use a technique like, focus groups, or bringing in customers to show them certain things and get their feedback in real time. You want to have your end game. What are the outcomes that you desire, right? Not just, I want to get there, how I want to get there, what is the problem, but this is what I want to see at the end. The fail fast concept, make sure you understand that as an executive. Meaning that in Agile, when you do something in a short amount of time and you launch something in production, you fail fast, meaning you're able to see right away if you hit the mark or you miss the mark, and then you can pivot. So fail fast. As an executive, when you transform to Agile, you want to make sure your Scrum teams understand that you initially, for the first couple of sprints, are okay with safe to fail versus fail safe. Safe to fail meaning you tell your people, listen, I know we're going to a new process. I know there's going to be a bump along the way, or a couple of bumps along the way, and that's okay. I'm not expecting things to be perfect on day one. We're not trying to make things feel safe, but we're always inspecting and adapting, and we're always choosing continuous process improvement as opposed to expecting and having this, misnomer that we're going to have things perfect on day one. You also need to understand what your culture is and what it can support. If you have to do change management training, or if you have to do other things that help your teams get accustomed to this new world, you need to understand what that is and make sure you do that. And also, as we said before, understand the root causes and whether your solution is going to address those root causes that you're trying to solve. What is your role as an executive in Agile? Understand the key concepts so you're able to speak about them and understand the high level benefits of going Agile: faster time to market, responding to change, frequent feedback loops to help you inspect and adapt. Providing that leadership, thinking, focus, and behaviors, the safe to fail versus fail safe, as we just talked about. Helping the enterprise with Agile leadership competency and maturity. Continue setting the overall strategy and make the funding decisions as to what projects get funded. So I'm sure at the executive level, you have strategic planning sessions. You fund certain projects. You don't fund other projects. So make sure that gets trickled down and people understand not just what, but why and how. That's also an important part of your role. Always be open to a new approach. So just like Agile, you inspect and adapt. You as an executive should also be ready to inspect and adapt. Trust the people in your processes because they will amaze you. Empower individuals and teams to reach their highest potential. Understand and support the 3 champion roles in Scrum, and show your support and be visible. The concept of management by wandering around. Attend key events such as the sprint reviews to lend your support, to tell people, I'm here, I have your back. If there's things you need from me, I'm here to help you be successful. Ultimately, that's one of the key roles of an executive, particularly in Agile. Some research findings for the 14th Annual State of Agile Report, which recently was just published a couple weeks ago. So I won't read all the bullets, but you can see here that respondents reporting organizations are either currently implementing value stream management or planning to do so. Agile still is confined to development, IT, and operations, although a lot of people are now being more open-minded about, it's some core Agile competencies that they can develop by being more open-minded about the capabilities of Agile and then being able to interpret that into their own environment and being able to borrow some of the techniques to improve things and turn up the dial slowly, right? 95% of the respondents report their organizations use one of the Agile methods. 81% said their organizations have teams where the members do not work in the same organization, so that shared resources and shores and vendors and so forth. So that all comes into play, and they're able to do it successfully. Multiple teams co-located, collaborating across geographic boundaries. Some, things we've tried in the past, at least on projects I've been on, was to shift hours of developers working offshore so that they overlapped with the product owner and the Scrum team for some portion of the day. Instead of, especially if you work with developers, say in India, where there's a large time difference. So, definitely creative ways that you could accomplish and fill the gap for not being able to be co-located. Same analysis, a 14th Annual State of Agile report, how success is measured with Agile transformations. You can see here the large ones: customer satisfaction, business value, on-time delivery, quality, all the things that I've seen on my client and the things that have in reality been accomplished. You see them reported here by others who have participated in the study. So definitely something to think about. And these are not small numbers, and they're very critical components of your overall product and customer satisfaction. The reasons for adopting Agile, as you would expect, would be to, faster time to market, being able to adapt to changing priorities, so built for change, increasing productivity, by helping the team work on high business value items first and not anything in any kind of random order, but increasing productivity by also optimizing the development team by reducing the noise and outside interruptions and having them focus and be productive. Improving business and IT alignment. So IT, helps deliver value for the business, so that collaboration by having the product owner from the business side give that to the IT people who are building the solution helps with that alignment and quality and some of those other things that you see further down on the list. But those are the reasons. In the benefits, harnessing the change as a strategic advantage, able to manage changing priorities, greater visibility and transparency, better alignment, faster time to market. So the point of these two slides, the reason we have them here is to say, these were the reasons we wanted to go Agile for, these were the reasons for adopting Agile. And lo and behold, these are the benefits that we accomplished. So if you look at them, they're kind of mirror images. So we wanted this, we got this. We wanted this from Agile, and we got this. That's how I sort of summarize the findings of the last two slides. Okay, executives, should you go Agile? The answer we would say is it depends. But if you want faster business value, then yes. If all your projects are on time and on budget, you may still benefit from Agile practices. And we believe businesses will always need agility, faster time to market, and to be more in tune with what their customers want and expect. I can't believe there's an executive out there who says, no, I want to be slower. No, I don't want to be agile. No, I don't want to be in tune with my customer. So if those things are important for you, as I think they are for most executives, then Agile may be something you'd want to really think about and dig into. There's always opportunity to lift your business value, delivery speed, and ROI with Agile. I can't think of any business that doesn't need to adapt to change, especially in this environment. So Agile is also, the answer there. And as an executive, I would say to you, even if you're very happy with your current results, you will likely find some benefit in going Agile. So just because things are going well doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement. How do you get started? Prepare your team. More selling than telling. You want to make sure people understand your reasons for going Agile. Understand what you need to do to get there. What are the gaps? What training your people may need? Who's going to play what role? You need to map people and the roles they're going to play. And then based on, let's say these project managers are now targeted to be the Scrum Masters, what's the training that they need? So you need to make sure you give them that support and that training. You may want to do a pilot instead of saying, okay, Friday we're done with waterfall, Monday we start Scrum. You may want to do a pilot, start with a project or two, and then roll that out, further within the organization. So start with a pilot. Make sure you don't do this on your own. Bring in a coach or someone on your staff who's really well-versed in Agile techniques and methods to help coach the others, because they need support, especially in the beginning. to show them what things they need to adapt, what they may be misapplying from Agile. And that's also very important for you to be successful. A lot of people may have the tendency to abandon their Agile transformation and blaming Agile as it's not working for us. But the real reason is the way it's being applied. It's not Agile itself. It's the way the transformation was occurring or how it was being applied. Throughout, make sure you talk to your people, you communicate with your key supporters to make sure they understand, and be transparent and always, always be ready to inspect and adapt as needed. A quick timeline, within 4 weeks, as I said with my client, where we're up and running in about 4.5 weeks in this particular client, to start scrumming. So with that, we outlined the goals, we created the teams, we did the training and enablement, and we defined the success metrics and the measurement. And then we also determined at the same time, like the rollout timeline. So how many teams we spin up on day one, how many Scrum teams we have. We started with 5 teams, ended up with 7 teams, for example. So think about. Scaling, we talked earlier about scaling, and scaling just means bringing the Agile up at the enterprise level and having the enterprise adopt Agile techniques, not just one department or pockets within the enterprise, but being able to scale it up at the enterprise level. So within the scaled Agile framework, no surprise, there are different techniques. Just like in Agile, you have Kanban and Lean and Scrum and so forth. In scaling, you also have techniques. Most popular is SAFe at 35%, you see here, followed by Scrum of Scrums at 16%. A lot of others don't know, and other at 28% and so forth. So a couple of things I'll call out here. Scrum of Scrum is by far the most common, easy to implement method, in our opinion. Can be implemented at the department level. And let's say you have a department, they have 5 Scrum teams, and each team has a Scrum Master, a product owner, and development team. So a Scrum of Scrums is a team that sits on top of those 5 teams, and one person from each of those teams, called an ambassador, attends that Scrum of Scrums so that they can talk about any cross-team issues and solve any cross-team problems, cross-team blocks, and so forth. Very, very easy to implement. Where Scaled Agile Framework is a little bit heavier, is a little bit more complex to implement, but very appropriate when you have an enterprise level Agile. It's got 4 levels, strategic at the top, and 3 levels beneath it are more tactical, where things kind of roll up if you can envision that framework. But it's definitely a little more complex to implement. And Jim and I are both certified in SAFe, so we can help you with that if you're already far down the road of your Agile adoption and you're looking to bring it up at the enterprise level. A few key metrics, certainly not exhaustive, but as an executive, I know you love metrics. I know you'd want to know how you will know if you're being successful or not. So we offer you here some different categories of metrics, quantitative, qualitative, etc. And it doesn't mean you have to do all of these on day one. It means you can select, the first set of metrics, the second set of metrics, and the third set of metrics. And just because we have these in columns called first, second, and third, doesn't mean you can't select some from these and, select however many you'd like to do, but just make sure you tell people which metrics you're going to use, how you're going to calculate those metrics, and why you chose those metrics versus something else. So, if people understand, they have a better chance of, engaging if you solicit their input. It's very important so that it underscores that we're all one team, we're all in this together kind of thing, as opposed to these are the metrics I want, and have that trickle down to the team. So it's really important for that collaboration with the team and transparency with the team. PMI, what do they have to say about Agile? So as you know, the PMBOK guide for many years had been 100% waterfall based, but PMBOK 6, which came out in 2017, has huge incorporation of Agile practices and a separate Agile practice guide. In 2021, January, so in about 6 or 7 months, the PMP exam is going to be 50% Agile per the PMI content outline. So it's definitely not a fad. Instructors who work for PMI will have to demonstrate hands-on Agile experience before they're able to teach that. And PMI recently acquired Disciplined Agile, which is another framework that integrates several Agile best practices into a comprehensive model. So PMI, the giant professional organization of project managers, is really ramping up their Agile content, their documentation, their books, and so forth, and just really underscoring another thing that Agile is not a fad, and it's really growing, if anything else. C-suite embracing Agile. Please know that Agile is just not a set of methods, it's a mindset. So don't do Agile, but be Agile in every aspect. Set the tone from the top, welcome that change and take advantage of emergent opportunities. Welcome continuous innovation, understand that it's part of the process, it's expected, it's built in. When you think things are great, things can always get better, there's always room for improvement. Strike that right balance between entrepreneurship and risk-taking. Just because your teams are self-organized, they're accountable for their success, you still want to have that be somewhat disciplined, right? You want to make sure people work on projects and features at the lowest level that have alignment with whatever your strategic direction is for your overall company. Whatever projects and programs that you funded, you make sure they see that alignment, and to also show that what they're working on is relevant and important and helps deliver the overall corporate strategy. Very important to make people feel good about the work and how important there is. Design metrics that measure that progress and continuous process improvement opportunities, again with transparency to the team. Build dynamic loops and real-time decision making, and always be ready to inspect and adapt. You've probably seen me heard me mention inspect and adapt, and seen it throughout this presentation. Scrum relies on 3 pillars: inspect, adaptation, and transparency. So you will hear those themes throughout this presentation, as you already have. Agile leadership team champions, maybe for a large enterprise, it may be difficult for a single executive to be the go-to person or the driver of all Agile practices within the organization. So you may want to form Agile leadership teams that have different representatives from parts of the company that help drive down Agile practices and help support up any Scrum team needs that need to get resolved, whether it's more resources, more funding, whatever the thing may be. So you want to establish that proximity between the executive, the Agile leadership teams, all the way down to the Scrum team. So again, not just one team within the Scrum team, but also one team within the enterprise with access to leadership who can help provide additional funding, decision-making where it's critical and that it affects something at the enterprise level, and so forth. Again, same themes about communication, rapid feedback, communication ambassadors, and transparency. Recapping key benefits: increased ROI, earlier realization of business value, ability to fail fast and pivot as needed, smaller, more frequent releases, increase in predictability of actual value, increased customer satisfaction, increase in quality. And please, for executives, think about this as an evolution, not a revolution. So make sure you set that tone from the top to your team that this is going to be an ongoing learning process, ongoing continuous improvement, and it's going to be an evolution into a better place as you go and you stick to the transformation and the principles and the practices that you worked so hard to implement. Key headlines: culture is still important. This is one of the highest ranking challenges to adopting and scaling Agile, is the organizational culture. So that's why I say to executives, setting the tone from the top is very important. Scrum and SAFe are still, the most popular scaling techniques. Ability to change and manage to changing priorities and project visibility are the top 2 capabilities. And after all, I don't know a single executive I've ever spoken to on the dozens and dozens of projects I've worked on where they don't want to know how the money that they've allocated for a project is being spent and whether it's being well spent, right? I don't know a single executive who says, no, I don't need to know that. So you want to make sure that you have the framework to enable you as an executive to be able to respond to your peers and your bosses and your stakeholders as to how the funds are being spent and what business value has been delivered. Here's a 20-second elevator speech. I won't go through it, but we thought it might be kind of fun to have just a little blurb and an elevator speech for executives on what is Agile. Some early adopters of Agile, wholly or in part. This is not a, obviously an exhaustive list. This is just the early adopters: Fidelity, GE, Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. So the journey continues. And a little explanation about who we are as an Agile collaborative. And if you visit our website, which is referenced here, agile-collaborative.com, you can see all the services that we provide for you, the transformations we can help you with, the training and enablement we can help you with, and so forth. So, Jim, I'll turn back to you and see if there are any questions in the chat.
Yeah, so we're a little long the league, so we'll keep it short. Basically, I've answered I think I've answered most of the questions that came up through chat as we went along. One of the big questions that came up was elaborating more on that PM to SM, so Scrum Master transition. I'd like to start that one off by saying, first of all, someone suggested maybe adding in a bullet there where we talk about what executives need to know is how to help their people make that transition. And secondly, part of the problem with the transition is not a problem or something to think about is you may have said it, but I'll repeat it. On the project management side, in a traditional project management, and we all know, you and I know this well, it's a command and control situation. I, as the project manager, manage the team and tell them what to do and when. When a project manager has to then transition into an agile role, he or she has to then become more of a facilitator or a coach and sort of let go. That's the hard part, to let go, that become more of a coach because they aren't telling the person what to do. So that's 2 points. And the third point is people don't have to give up their career. One person said, hey, my company, chatted and said, my company has 2,000 project managers. Nobody's saying their training or their certification is invaluable. They can train to become Scrum Masters if the organization doesn't do a full-scale transformation. And
Right.
some of their projects may be project management, traditional. Some may be Scrum. They're actually enhancing their career in that respect.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that was, are there any more questions out there in our chat? I think those were, we handled them as we went along, which I thought was good, but I don't know if there's any more that I'm taking a look at the chat now. No, I don't see anything. I think we're good. We recorded this, and this will be available within the next 24 hours or so. But Malik, anything else to say at the end?
No, I just want to thank everyone. And if you have any, follow-up questions, or if there's a need you have that you'd like to talk about, please don't, hesitate to reach out to us.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.